This is a brief sort of difference that you would see between the OWASP top 10 and OWASP API top 10. OWASP top 10, the first version came out in 2003, and it has been primarily focused on how organizations should protect their web applications. In 2019, as I said, OWASP came up with the first list of API top 10. Now, the important thing over here is if you see the OWASP top 10, majority of the techniques that hackers use to attack web APIs, web are very standard techniques. They are very generic in nature, mostly regex based. Think of injection being the number one priority there. Cross-site scripting or broken access control or insecure deserialization. So many of these techniques are very signature based and very generic in nature across applications. But if you see the OWASP API top 10, the first version itself had a number of techniques like broken object level authorization, excessive data exposure, mass assignment, or broken function level authorizations. All of these techniques were very, very specific and very custom to the application that is to be protected. And that's where the struggle of some of the legacy technology started, because if you think of web application firewalls or DAST, they don't understand anything about the behavior of the application, and hence they cannot protect against the OWASP API top 10 techniques. Now, very recently, around a month back, OWASP came up with a revised 2023 list. So let's take a look at the two lists, what has changed and why certain things have changed and what organization can do to address the problems. Now, on the left side, you see OWASP API Top 10 2019, and on the right side, you see OWASP API Top 10 2023. If you see this, there are few categories which have been modified. The one marked in yellow, like broken user authentication, is now broken authentication. Similarly, API 4 in 2019, which is lack of resources and rate limiting, is now same API 4, but unrestricted resource consumption. There are few things which have been removed from 2019 because as the OWASP community went through the data and the attacks that were submitted to them for analysis, they realized that injection is not that big an issue with APIs. Similarly, insufficient logging and monitoring is not very relevant for API security, and they decided to remove these two techniques from the new 2023 list. And they have modified a number of other techniques, which we will dig into in the next slide. So if you see the 2023 list, the broken object level authorization stays as number one, which was also the case in 2019. If you see the second one, broken user authentication, what OWASP has done is they have removed the user authentication from there. So they have widened the scope of authentication. Perhaps they have brought in not just user authentication, but machine-to-machine authentication, because a lot of APIs are actually meant for machine interactions. The third one is very important: broken object property level authorization. This is a new entry into the list, and we will dig into this in the next slide. We already talked about the fourth one, which is unrestricted resource consumption. It's sort of a renaming of what was present earlier, like lack of resources and rate limiting, but perhaps it's a little better worded because to reflect the kind of attacks that were going on. Broken function level authorization, which was in API 5 fifth position in 2019, stays in the fifth position also in 2023. But thereafter, there is a lot of changes. So API 6 in 2023 is now unrestricted access to sensitive business flows, meaning certain attackers are able to access certain sensitive business flows and repeatedly calling them. So, this is API 6. Server-side request forgery is seen as a common problem with APIs, especially in the APIs which are taking some sort of a URI or as an argument. This is something which is a new addition into the list. Security misconfiguration was present in 2019 at the seventh position, but has been brought down to the eighth position. So it's in the new list. It's a little lesser priority. Uh, uh, Improper asset management, which was API 9 position in the 2019 list, is now renamed. Instead of assets, OWASP is now talking about inventory management. So OWASP API top 9 is improper inventory management, which means an organization should spend and understand all the APIs they have in their environment. They should understand the sensitive data exposures via those APIs, maintain an up-to-date inventory of their APIs. The last one, unsafe consumption of APIs, is also a new addition instead of insufficient logging and monitoring. And this is again pointing to some sort of unrestricted, access to APIs that many applications actually end up with. So this is, the difference between 2019 and 2023. And now let's dig a little deeper into, what it means for the organizations. So one thing is very, very clear, that there is a much more emphasis on authorization related attacks in OWASP API Top 10 2023. In fact, if you see the first one, broken object level authorization, you see the third one, broken object property level authorization, which is a new addition. And it's a mixture of two techniques called excessive data exposure and mass assignment in the earlier 2019 are now combined into property level authorization. And the next one is broken function level authorization. All of these three are present in the top five. So, this signifies the risk of fine-grained authorization in the application architecture. Now, one of the important point over here is, if you really think of authorizations, the right way of addressing authorization issue is, during the development and testing phase, which is nothing but the shift left phase. What it means is that organizations can and should spend more time in adopting a right, security tool which can identify and find some of these issues during the development cycle only, because these are very complex issues to be, to do the runtime protection. Now, let's talk about the other aspects which has changed in the OWASP top 10 list, and that's the focus on automated attacks as well as the rate limits. So similar to fine-grained authorization, which you can see is present in three places in the top five. The unrestricted or unsafe consumption of APIs are present in three positions. Again, very similar, but little lower in priority. So these are kind of automated attacks which hackers use, against the APIs. We have seen this, that I'll take an example of, say, retail or e-commerce businesses, where 30 to 40% of the traffic on these applications are actually bot traffic, and these are automated traffic where hackers might be, doing some sort of a carding or a payment related attacks, might be doing account takeovers based on whatever data they may have got through. Right, they may try coupon cracking sort of attacks. They may do scalping kind of attacks. Scraping is one of the common and most prevalent problems that majority of the applications face. Primarily, the competitors would be extracting certain data and for their own purpose from the applications, and that results into a lot of automated pressure on the application. And then last but not the least are denial of services sort of attacks that organizations are facing. Now, all of these three techniques are better addressed at the runtime. It's very difficult for, while it is important for applications to build certain workflow, put certain restrictions and rate limits for these APIs, but at the same time, these are something which are primarily dealt in runtime, not during the dev time. Let's focus on the third aspects of the changes that have gone into the OWASP 2023. What you would also see is that there is a renewed focus on security hygiene, right? Things like broken authentication, where it could be a mistake, it could be some governance-related challenge, where APIs are left unauthenticated or APIs are left with or unauthenticated API may be leaking out certain sensitive data, which is very, very important for hackers to target, right? Similarly, the misconfigurations where certain settings are not properly set, maybe TLS is not enabled, or cookies are not properly secured, or JWT is not properly signed, right? All of these are basic misconfigurations that can happen because of developers' mistakes and other reasons. And API 9, which is improper inventory management, is again one of the most prevalent problem that we have seen with many of our customers, where when they start, they do not have visibility of how many APIs they have. They do not have visibility into the sensitive data that these APIs are leaking, which means that if they can't see something, obviously they cannot protect against it, right? So improper inventory management is a very important addition to the OWASP top 10 list in 2023. Now, any questions so far?
No, Puneet, at this point of time, I am not seeing any questions from that window.
Sure, sure. So let me just dig a little deeper into how organizations should think of protecting their applications against API attacks, right? Many of us are well aware that API attacks are actually business logic attacks. I think one of a very important example was what happened at Coinbase in the last year, 2022, February, where they had to suspend the trading. And the reason was a white hat hacker was able to sell cryptos on their application without owning those cryptos. What this hacker did was bypass one of the most elementary, most basic check of a trading platform. And that, using APIs, he was able to temper the flow of the program, right? Hence, API attacks are very, very unique, very custom, very targeted. You can also call them as zero-day off applications. And unlike traditional attacks like SQL injection or remote command execution or cross-site scriptings, which are very generic in nature, you can write a regex and perhaps you would be able to block, if not all, most of those. The API attacks are very, very specific to application, and unless a security platform builds deep understanding of the application, it cannot protect against the API based attacks. And this is what AppSentinels does well. AppSentinels platform builds a very deep understanding of the customer application. It understands the business logic of what the customer application is doing, and it starts with discovery of APIs. It understands, it discovers each and every API in real time, understands the structure of those APIs, understand how users are accessing the application, how, if there are tokens or cookies, how those are getting refreshed, right? While it discovers all APIs, it also tries to understand the context and intent of each API. I'll give a very brief example. If you think of a trading application, right, you may have an API which fetches stock price, live stock price, and you have another API which resets a password, right? There is a big difference in context of both the APIs, and majority of the platform does not understand this context. App Sentinels, on the contrary, understand this out of the box. It knows what are the APIs responsible for payments, what are the APIs responsible for cards handling, or any other HIPAA or that sort of EHR data. So it has a much broader context of what this application is doing or what this API is responsible for. Further, AppSentinels platform understands how these APIs are interacting with each other, what is the relationship or sequences of APIs. It discovers the happy path an application supports. These happy paths are nothing but what a product management sort of defines, and the product team goes and builds those, right? If Like what you can see over here on the screen is a marketplace, and there could be hundreds and thousands of workflows in a marketplace, like how a customer goes, searches for a product, and adds a product into the cart. How does, from there on, a customer or a user of the application goes and checks out from his cart and makes a successful payment via a credit card or via a banking transaction, right? All of these are workflows that App Sentinels will understand end to end, because these involves calling certain APIs in certain order, passing the right arguments to make certain business logic workflow happen. Once App Sentinels build this deep understanding, it then locks it down so that the same workflows cannot be tampered by somebody. Um, right? It understands the fine-grained relationship between your application parameters to make sure that the authorization that are meant for specific parameters or specific IDs is preserved. Further, App Sentinels also understand the roles an application supports. If I again go with an example of a marketplace, you would have a buyer and you would have a seller. App Sentinels will discover these roles. It understand what APIs a buyer is calling in what context, what APIs a seller is calling in what context, and make sure that a buyer is not calling seller's API and vice versa. It also maps the sensitive data of an application to give a complete picture to the organization on all the sensitive data their application is consuming or sending out to the users. Now, as you saw in the OWASP API top 10, right? There are authorization related techniques, three of them in the top five. And as we said and discussed, that many of these authorization related techniques are better handled during the build cycle, during the CI/CD or the shift left cycle, right? At the same time, the other three important categories in the OWASP API Top 10 2023 are related to unsafe, unrestricted consumption or calling of APIs, and these two are needs to be handled in a very different way. So what what we believe that OWASP is strongly recommending is adopting a comprehensive approach to API security. And that comprehensive approach means that organizations should adopt a full lifecycle API security platform, a platform which helps organizations across the entire lifecycle. When the API is written or coded or implemented, it is being tested in a UAT or a pre-prod environments. Thereafter, it is deployed in production. It's being used. Maybe months and years later, it has to be retired, right? During the entire life cycle of that API, a platform should help, and that's what AppSentinels does. So the value proposition that AppSentinels offers are split across four main pillars. The first pillar is the 360-degree continuous discovery and posture management. So what AppSentinels platform will do is do discovery of all kind of APIs across entire estate of an application. If you can't see something, you can't protect. So with that philosophy, a customer would have a complete inventory, a real-time updated inventory of all APIs, understand risk each of these APIs is facing, because App Sentinels understand the context. It also knows the sensitive data that these APIs might be exposing. So this is just the first pillar. The second pillar is the continuous stateful API testing. We all know how the software development processes have evolved. Almost everybody has moved to agile from waterfall models. Everybody has moved to, instead of building large monolith, organizations are now building microservices on Kubernetes, and there are hundreds and thousands of microservices which are being implemented. All right. Now, what is happening in all of this is that the testing time has reduced because organizations are now making more and more deployments, in rush to outpace their competitors. What is happening here is the testing cycle has drastically compromised or reduced, and security testing is not happening at the pace or at the scale it should happen with every deployment. This is a big pain point that App Sentinels addresses because, as App Sentinels understand the exact workflows, the happy path scenarios or the negative path scenarios, it can execute those workflows with security in mind. So it can find and make sure that all the dependencies, all the relationships that an application has across all the parameters are validated, and the fine grained authorization is taken care of in the CI/CD cycle itself, right? So this is one of the most important pillar because all the dashed solution that exists today in the market can only do stateless testing of APIs. By testing APIs in a stateless fashion, you cannot achieve the right code coverage of certain APIs. And on the contrary, what AppSentinels does is it will do a stateful testing, making sure all the right parameters are passed to each of the APIs to exercise certain workflows. So this is the second pillar. The third pillar that we have is multi-layer protection. And I think all of us are well aware that hackers are evolving, new techniques are emerging every single day. What you need is a defense in depth approach, a platform which can take care of a variety of attacks that APIs can be exposed to, right? You have web application firewalls which can protect against, say, only a particular class of product, mostly injection attacks. You have bought products which are more or less irrelevant today because they are not able to understand APIs and protect against carding and other kind of automated attacks. And then you have attack techniques, what are mentioned in OWASP API top 10, things like BOLAs and BFLAs, which neither WAF nor bot products can understand. This is why what we have built is a very comprehensive multi-layer defense or protection shield, which protects against all kind of known attacks. What happens, what a WAF can protect, all kind of unknown attacks, because it understands how the application is functioning. It understands the workflow. It does not allow any tampering to happen, like what happened at Coinbase. If Coinbase had been using this, they would not have to shut down their exchange. It also protects against the automated attacks, which are very common problem with API-based applications. Last but not the least is our fourth pillar, which is a remediation pillar. Now, compared to all the other security verticals, where most of the remediations are around patching and upgrades, the API remediations are very different because the organization's own team, product teams are responsible to fix the problems and deliver it to to the deployment. And on the other side, the security operations team are responsible for protecting their application against attack. So the remediation workflows that App Sentinels have built addresses needs and pain points of both the developers, because they are responsible for building secure APIs, and that's what App Sentinels helps them with, and security operations team in sort of protecting their application against known, unknown, and automated attacks. So App Sentinels has some real interesting workflows for taking care of what the developer needs as well as what the SecOps team need. This slide is a little more detail into my earlier slide, so you people can quickly glance through it. as I've explained most of this in my earlier slide itself. So now coming to the takeaways, as we know that the new OWASP API Top 10 2023, it's already gaining a lot of traction. But the key takeaways that we can share with you is that the fine-grained authorization is one of the biggest problem with the API security or application security. It's the most significant risk. Further, three of the top five categories are attributed to fine grained authorization. Things like broken object level authorizations, broken object property level authorization, and broken function level authorization. Next, you know, organizations should adopt a platform which builds deep understanding of the application, because to protect against fine grained authorization, a platform should understand what the application is doing in the first place. And many of these problems can be addressed by adopting the right shift left in initiative, things like intelligent stateful API task that would help address most of the problems that the fine grained authorization exposes organizations to. The next important takeaway here is to make sure that there is restrictions on APIs, there are rate limits, and there are some checks and balances against unsafe consumptions of APIs. While there are workflows that organization can build in terms of their application architecture itself, but it sort of highlights the importance of building or having some sort of a right runtime protection technology, because WAF and existing bots or Cloudflares and Akamais are not able to protect applications against such intelligent API attacks. The other changes that we have seen in this list is, again, emphasis on security hygiene. Mistakes can happen. APIs can be left unauthenticated. Unintended data, which should not be part of certain APIs, can still be part of those APIs. Those could be sensitive data, and they may be going out without organization knowing about it. Right? There could be other mistakes in deploying application and ensuring end-to-end security. So security hygiene, inventory management are other very important aspects that should not be ignored. End of the day, what we believe is that there is definitely a much more stronger emphasis from OWASP community to adopt or to push a full lifecycle API security platform in the organization. So with this, we are at the end of the webinar. If there are questions, we can take those.